Hey everybody, ready to go? Good to see you. Thanks for joining us here today. And we're on the territory of Lekwungen people of Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I'd like to begin by thanking AG Sharma and her team for their work on today's announcement, as well as Ministry of Transportation and Ministry of Jobs, Economic Development and Innovation, Ministers Gibson and Farnworth, who are joining us here in pulling together this legislation that we introduced in the House. Their teams, our government, is working tirelessly to stand up for British Columbians in this uncertain time. Now, I know we're angry, and we're worried and we're anxious as British Columbians, as Canadians, about the unpredictable and chaotic actions of the President as he works to apparently try to collapse the U.S. economy and bring Canada with it. And we can't stand by as we know that he is going to continue to bring out unpredictable executive orders, directions that include direct attacks, not just on Canada, but on now the European Union, on other countries around the world. For our part, our job is to protect BC jobs, protect BC families, and part of doing that work needs to be that we have the tools to be able to respond as quickly as the changes are coming from Trump. He has no regard for the chaos that he's causing, because we feel this is part of his strategy to hurt the Canadian economy and to force us into his vision of annexation to the United States of America, redrawing our borders and access to our water. Well, that's not going to happen. We're going to control our own destiny, and we will never be the 51st state. We're a proud and independent country. We're going to make our own decisions. We're not waiting. We're taking action on all fronts to respond to U.S. threats. Most recently, you will have seen that BC Hydro no longer offers rebates for equipment produced by Tesla, as well as Tesla electric vehicles. We are responding. We've taken all of the alcohol off the shelves in BC. We've issued directions around what to buy to Crown corporations, health authorities across government, and we will do more. We're diversifying our markets. We're leading the conversation on internal trade across Canada, as British Columbia always has. We're continuing that proud tradition of pushing nationally. And we're bringing people together to grow our economy here in BC and grow our Canadian economy, supporting national efforts as well. What is clear is that we are stronger together as a country responding to this threat. Living with the Americans is like the senior Trudeau said, it's like living beside an elephant, sleeping beside an elephant. It's a big, powerful country, and every twitch affects us. And right now, the beast is coming at us full speed. So we've got to stick together. In that context, we've introduced legislation today in the House, a bill that we hope will pass with the full support of the legislature. It does a few things. It responds to the escalating nature of the threats that we've seen. Just this week, the U.S. pulled out of our discussions on the future of the Columbia River Treaty. This is a treaty that was signed in 1964 that talks about how British Columbia works with the U.S. to prevent floods, how we share the electrical generation capacity of the massive dams that were constructed, and how we manage the river. The modernization of this treaty to protect salmon, to ensure that we're maximizing the benefit of electricity, but also recreational values in the Kootenays, communities that were very affected when these dams were built. Those discussions were put on pause this week. And so as this happens, and as things continue to escalate with the United States, one thing is clear for British Columbia: we can never leave ourselves again to be in the position of being at the whim of one person in the White House. We have to move faster, and we have to be incredibly nimble to respond to the escalating situation. So the legislation that we introduced does those things. It gives us a new tool to respond to the threat of a 25% across-the-board tariff against Canadians and against British Columbians. by allowing government to impose tolls on commercial vehicles bringing goods from Washington State through to Alaska. It allows us to ensure we're buying BC and Canadian products, and products, frankly, and services from anywhere else except from the United States for our core government purchases. This reflects about $600 million in annual purchasing, at least. And this gives us the legal authority to direct the Crown corporations and health authorities and all of government to prefer products not from the US and to buy Canadian products. And the third piece that this does is that it gives us the tools to respond in real time to executive orders that target Canada, that target British Columbia. I wish I could say we could predict what the president is going to do next, but I don't think anyone can predict that. I'm not even sure the president can predict what he's going to do next. And so we need to have the tools in place to be able to respond quickly. This is a significant piece of legislation in that it gives regulation-making authority to government that does not require it to go through the legislature immediately. And so given the unique nature of these powers, it's important that there are checks and balances in place, and I'm going to ask the Attorney General to walk you through what those are. One of the things that's really important for me is to underline how important it is and how much we understand the person-to-person relationships that we have across the border with our friends, the American people. I recognize, and we all recognize, that the American people are not the president. These are different things. And I've been receiving many, many letters in my office from Americans who are apologizing for the actions of the president, who are expressing their support for British Columbia and for Canada and their appreciation for our relationship. And they're standing with us. Just today, representatives from the European Union put up a video supporting Canadians. We're seeing that support show up in surprising and wonderful ways. For the Americans, as a gesture and as a reinforcement of what I truly believe, which is that this is one man, this is not Americans, reached out to Governor Ferguson in Washington and invited him to come up to British Columbia. The governor has agreed to come up to visit, to express his support for our relationship, and we're working on dates right now. We can work together despite the trade war that the president has brought to us. We didn't want it. We didn't sign up for it, but we're not going to back down. We're going to fight back, elbows up. And I say that recognizing that my default elbow setting is already pretty high. We're going to make a better future for ourselves. There's nowhere else I'd rather be in the world to face down this threat, and the world is facing the threat from the president, than right here in British Columbia. We've got everything we need to be successful here, and now we have some legislative tools to ensure that we realize that potential and we find a path forward where we stand on our own 2 feet. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Premier, and thank you all for joining us here today. The Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act was tabled in the legislature early today, as the Premier mentioned. If passed, it will allow government to have increased tools and authority to respond to trade threats from the United States. There are some features of this bill that are important to emphasize. This is a broad piece of enabling legislation. It empowers government to respond quickly and take action in a wide range of areas. The legislation will allow us to respond in a timely fashion to new threats as they emerge. This legislation is temporary. The powers are time limited and will sunset no later than mid-2027. We can use this legislation to respond quickly to the emerging developments and carry out the work of longer term and permanent changes at the same time. The proposed legislation does not give government unchecked broad power. There are guardrails in place. The bill allows us to enable existing agencies and government bodies to carry out their mandates despite external attempts to harm our economy and our sovereignty. Government cannot use the authorities given by this bill to allow natural resource projects without permits or environmental assessments, and it cannot use the authorities to sidestep Indigenous consultation requirements. Those remain protected. We've been careful to frame the bill in such a way that allows us to respond over time to varying levels or potential countermeasures and when they happen. The tools in the legislation are about setting us up to respond quickly and will not have to be used unless the U.S. forces our hand to use them. The tools included in the bill allow government to reduce immediate pressures and create time to build longer-term and permanent solutions and build a strong, resilient economy, address barriers to interprovincial trade, direct public bodies to buy goods and services from jurisdictions that aren't threatening or imposing tariffs on us, impose tolls, fees on U.S. commercial vehicles using provincial public infrastructure like highways, take any other action necessary to defend BC's economy from the impact of trade threats. There's one thing that we've learned over the past few weeks, it's that the current American administration is unpredictable. We as a government need to be ready to respond to protect British Columbians, our economy, the jobs that may be at stake, and alter our course quickly. Like you, our government is frustrated by the actions of President Trump. I want to assure you that the government has your back. We are taking action to protect the livelihoods and independence of British Columbians. We are proudly Canadian. Elbows up.
Happy to take questions from our friends in the media here today.
Reminder to callers on the line to press star 1 to enter the queue. We'll start with Richard Zussman, Global News.
Premier, as the Attorney General mentioned, there are pretty wide sweeping powers in here. You mentioned that as well, but specifically around fees for those who could be going to Alaska. Could this also impact people going to Point Roberts, that goods moving from Washington State to Point Roberts through BC would be hit with this fee? And what are we talking about in terms of how much, and at what point do you actually put something like this into play?
The Attorney General described this as enabling legislation, and what that means is that it gives government the authority to do something, to bring it into force through regulation. You know, for people at home who are watching this, and there's a threat of 25% tariffs on everything one day, and now 25% on steel and aluminum, and there's a special investigation into lumber coming from Canada for additional tariffs. And you know, today there was a 200% tariff proposed by the president on his Twitter network about EU alcohol products. The threats are all over the place. It's hard to know what will actually show up. This gives us the tool to respond when he takes those actions to hurt Canada. And the specific vehicles and the routes that we're looking at currently are from Washington State to supply Alaska, and it's a very specific reason why we're looking at that. It's not because we hate Alaskans, it's because there's a Republican governor and there's a Republican congresswoman, and they have access to the president. They have the ability to deliver the message for us, how integrated we are. And in fact, the Alaska Highway was built in partnership between Canada and the United States. Subsidized, repairs to it are being subsidized in part by the Alaskan government. This is how we work together. I need that congresswoman and that governor to go to the president and say, what are you doing? And so we're looking at tools that minimize the impact on British Columbians and maximize the impact on Americans, especially those Americans who can send a message to the president.
What triggers it, I guess, is the question. I know you mentioned Trump is saying maybe this, maybe that, but like, what is the trigger point? And also, you mentioned things that don't impact British Columbians. At what point is the procurement issue, a health authority, someone else is trying to get product, and the only option is the United States? In essence, how far do they have to look for non-U.S. products before they can buy American?
Yeah, we've been like all British Columbians. You're at the grocery store, you're looking at the labels now, trying to buy Canadian whenever you can. And it's hard. It's hard to always buy Canadian, and there's lots of American products that there's no substitute for. The same is certainly true in healthcare environments for key government supplies that we require. So our direction to the Crown corporations, to government officials is make your best efforts. We are taking the time in advance of the full 25% tariff. To do that research, we've encouraged the health authorities and the Crown corporations to do that research. What are the alternatives? Who are the Canadian suppliers? We're engaged in conversations across Canada. How can we all pitch our buying power together, for example, around medical supplies, so we can buy from a single Canadian medical supplier and not be at the whims of international medical equipment suppliers? These are the kinds of pieces of work that are happening right now to minimize our dependence on the United States and to access other distributors, other products.
Next, we have a question from Rob Shaw, Check News.
Premier, the last part of this bill seems to give you extraordinary powers to do a lot of different things without the legislature. And I'm wondering why you can't just do them through the legislature, keep it running, get it done. You've got a majority government. And when you say we're not going to be at the whim of one man at the White House, have we not set up a system here where the government's sort of at the whim of you, and that he's going to be signing executive orders in the Oval Office, and then we flip to you signing executive orders in the Premier's office, and two democratic systems are bypassed for leaders' orders?
Yeah, not at all, Rob. The bill actually requires these orders in council, these regulations, to come to the legislature, to be ratified by the legislature. It also, as a whole, sunsets within a 2-year period. The scenario I want to invite people to consider is one in which the United States rips up the Columbia River Treaty and shuts off access to the common entitlement of electricity between Washington State and Canada. We will have to take some pretty dramatic actions in a very short period of time. It's crucial that whatever the emergency is that the president incurs upon Canada in an effort to damage us, that we're able to respond quickly to minimize the damage. We see this as emergency legislation. This is not everyday legislation. This is not routine legislation. This is in an emergency situation where we need legislative authority, we need government authority to do something quickly to minimize damage to the economy, to people, in an unpredictable action from an unpredictable president. And so that's the intent of the legislation. There are a number of safeguards built in there. And I might invite the Attorney General to walk through some of those safeguards.
Yeah, thank you, Premier. We were very careful to design the legislation to be sure and that this is for emergency steps that Cabinet will have to take due to the unpredictability, as the Premier mentioned, of what we're facing, but that there's space for the longer term work. I know my colleagues here and Minister Gibson are very tightly engaged with the business community and many other communities that are going to be impacted by this. So if there's something that we can do in the interim to mitigate harm, and to step in on an emergency style, the longer work will continue for that, the permanent changes to legislation and policy with close ties to all the people affected. The bill sunsets, so every action taken on this will sunset in May 2027. The guardrails that are put in place make it specific that the power could be used if there is something from a foreign jurisdiction that impacts our economy. So it's not broad in the sense of anything. It has to be something that shows it's an emergency action based on the tariff and the trade war we're in right now. And finally speaking, we would have to bring any action used under the emergency powers would come to the legislature, and there's a reporting requirement for that. It's clear that we will have to act in an emergency basis, but that doesn't mean that there won't be longer term work to transform our economy and diversify our economy in the ways that we need to.
Rob Shaw for a follow-up.
I'm just anticipating the opposition parties calling this some type of power grab. I mean, I don't know. I'm just anticipating that bypassing the legislature after a razor-thin election is a power grab. I guess I'm just wondering if you can respond to what I'm assuming is going to be that type of criticism.
Yeah, I won't put myself in the mind of the opposition right now, because I simply cannot understand how you can sit on a panel with a YouTuber that says, I'm going to encourage everybody to buy as much American as possible to undermine the boycott of American goods. Like, what the Conservative Party is thinking right now defies explanation. How you can welcome as a patriot a YouTuber that says that cutting off Doug Ford's efforts to cut off electricity to the United States to get the attention of the president were an act of war, and that the president should revisit harm on Canadians in response, and we get everything we deserve. Like, I can't explain that. I don't understand it. But I know that British Columbians need to know about our commitment to ensuring that there are safeguards in place for these authorities, that they are extraordinary authorities that would only and should only, and by the legislation can only, be used in extraordinary circumstances, that even if they are used, they have to come to the legislature to be ratified, that even if they are used, they expire after a specific time. And so when there's an emergency like a natural disaster, we have these authorities. This is a human-caused disaster. We can see it coming. We don't know what it is, and we need to be able to respond quickly. If we didn't have this, people would say, why didn't you respond? Why didn't you do the things that we needed you to do? When the president did this, you knew he was erratic, you knew he was issuing these orders. We don't want to use these authorities. We will work through the legislature. We have significant bills coming through around speeding up projects, around ensuring that we're growing our economy, and we are working through the legislature. But we sadly do need these authorities to make sure that we're able to respond in emergency, and frankly, I can see it coming like a freight train.
Rob Buffum, CTV.
Well, hi, Premier. I wanted to get your thoughts on the opposition. The Conservatives introduced that bill about daylight saving time. They say we're talking about elbows up, but we're still following the Americans' lead. Would you be open to the idea of voting in support of that bill? And also, I wanted to get your thoughts on concerns that were raised that these fees or tolls on ferries and highways, is there any chance those could unintendedly be applied to British Columbians?
Thanks, Rob. We're in the middle of a trade war with the United States. The focus is on growing the economy, making sure that we're getting rid of trade barriers across the country. We're working with business leaders and labor leaders to identify things that are holding us back and quickly address them. I am, trust me, I am as sympathetic as the next guy to kids that have trouble adjusting to time changes, or pets, or just waking up feeling like you're an hour behind. But in this moment, that is not government's number one priority, although it is the opposition's priority right now. On the second question, no, this is a specific authority in relation to the trade war. It's intended to minimize impact on British Columbians while maximizing impact on Americans. And that's the intent of the bill, the provision, and the tolling authority.
Rob Buffum for a follow-up.
I have a follow-up for a colleague who's doing a story. I think you probably would have heard about the 35-year-old British Columbian woman who is being detained. She tried to enter the States with an incomplete visa, and I gather since March 3rd she's been detained in what her family is characterizing as inhumane circumstances. I wanted to get your reaction. They're very upset, and it's been, 10 days now? They're not really in contact with her, and she's not being well treated. Yeah,
this is a terrible story. My heart goes out to this family and this woman that's stuck in some kind of immigration detention facility in the United States. The federal government should be doing all they can through diplomatic channels to get her returned to Canada as quickly as possible. Obviously, I don't know all the details here, but it certainly reinforces anxiety that many British Columbians have and many Canadians have about our relationship with the United States right now and the unpredictability of this administration and its actions. I am profoundly concerned about these kinds of actions that really, they violate the very idea that Canadians are safe in the United States when we visit. And I know it's not what Americans want. I know it's I don't even know if this case, if there are some things that could explain what's happening here, but the nature of our relationship is so fraught right now that this case makes us all wonder, what about our relatives who are working in the States? What about when we cross the border? What kind of an experience are we going to have? The harm that this does to the U.S. economy through impact to tourism, impacted business relationships, impacted people who are seeking visas to work in the United States who have special skills that they can't get anywhere else. It is reckless, the approach of the president, and this woman should be brought back to Canada as quickly as possible.
Next, we have a question from Vaughn Palmer, Vancouver Sun.
Hello, Premier. There are a number of override clauses in this bill, and they all say pretty much the same thing. Whether there's any conflict between anything done under this bill, almost any provincial law, any regulation, any authority, the bill prevails. That's a huge power grab, isn't it?
The bill itself has to pass through the Legislative Assembly. And there's an important section in the bill that I'd like to underline, just so the British Columbians are aware that it's in there. The first 5 sections of the bill cause us to recognize a consumer product that's made anywhere in Canada as good enough to be sold in British Columbia. A service that can be offered to anyone anywhere else in Canada is good enough to be offered in British Columbia. I'll just give you one example. If you want to sell meat in your province, you can do your own meat inspection. But if you want to sell it to another province, the federal government has to do a meat inspection of that as well, a second meat inspection, before it goes to another province. So for farmers in British Columbia who want to sell to Alberta or Ontario, they're restricted from doing that. This bill responds to those kinds of arcane, bizarre barriers that prevent free commerce across the country. It's important that this bill prevails over all of the, and there is a lot of regulations and rules and authorities in British Columbia that could block a product from Nova Scotia from coming here. And it's important to have that certainty for businesses that want to sell in British Columbia, and it's important for British Columbian businesses that want to sell in Nova Scotia to know that they can, that there's a provision that says it's legal, you're allowed to sell to other Canadians without any other uncertainty except for the exceptions that are set out in the bill itself. And that kind of certainty is crucial for business that's looking at setting up other markets in other provinces in Canada.
To Vaughn for a follow-up.
There are huge sections in the bill that have nothing to do with that include override clauses. But you said this is time limited. Well, it applies well into the second half of your term as Premier. That's not much of a limitation, is it?
To your first piece, in terms of the emergency authorities, it is equally crucial that if the president does something unpredictable to attack Canadians that impacts British Columbians, that we're able to act quickly and that there's not some other provision somewhere else that prevents us from responding quickly, that people can rely on the authority that we put forward under this bill. The time restriction is one of a number of restrictions. First of all, it has to relate to a trade measure that's or a measure that's brought in that harms British Columbia from the United States or from another foreign jurisdiction. That's the first restriction. The second one is that it is, as you say, time limited in itself, but it has to come to the legislature. It's got to come to the legislature in order to be ratified. The third, and the time limitation, is in terms of the authorities that are within the bill. The bill will have to be reintroduced again within the term of this government. We'll have to be accountable for how we used it. We'll have to be accountable to the legislature to ask for those authorities again, because I, like many British Columbians, suspect that we'll be seeing this kind of action from the president for the next 4 years. And so we're happy to come back and report on how we've used it and to ensure that those accountability measures are in place.
Next, we have a question from Les Lane, Times columnist.
Thanks. On the procurement, Premier, the finance ministry said $600 million worth of U.S. goods in the last fiscal year, but the note they gave me, it doesn't count I think the majority of the public sector, and the value of ongoing U.S. contracts is far higher. $600 million, I think, is a rock bottom estimate of the value. So the procurement issue, my understanding of this is that you can void any contracts with U.S. suppliers and be protected from any lawsuits. And would you be voiding contracts in midterm, or would you wait till they expire?
Yeah, that's not my understanding, Les, but I'll pass it over to my lawyer in a second here. What it does is it protects the public servant or the decision maker that makes the decision to to void the contract or to procure from a Canadian company. It protects them from being sued individually or for that action. We have a number of contracts with American companies, with American service providers. They have their own provisions about when contracts can be terminated, how they can be terminated. It's our intention to abide by those contractual provisions. But when those contracts come up for renewal, or if there are legal ways that we can end those contracts, we are directing Crown corporations and health authorities to do so if there's another supplier is Canadian or at least not American that they can contract with instead. We did stay away from school districts, from the university sector, colleges, and so on. They will likely be local governments. They'll likely be pursuing their own decisions around procurement. This was really around the core government functions. And so it's my hope that this will be a significant boost for Canadian businesses and local businesses, as well as a significant message to the United States.
Les for a follow-up.
You and the other premiers and the Prime Minister are meeting routinely through this. How many other premiers or the Prime Minister are going to look at this bill and say, that looks like a really good idea?
Well, I hope all of them, especially the first 5 provisions that relate to interprovincial trade. Because if we can tear down those interprovincial trade barriers, we'll be way further ahead as a country and we'll be able to grow our economy despite the U.S. tariffs. And the other reason why I hope they look at it is because each of us has those little pieces that can send a strong message to the U.S. Each province has an agreement with the U.S. or U.S. products transit through, or they provide a service to the U.S. It's all been part of being good neighbors over the years that these kinds of relationships have evolved, but they're very particular to each province. And so my hope is that we're all able to identify those, they're called technically non-tariff measures, but they're just these kinds of responses like a toll on the trucks going to Alaska that they can identify in their provinces and territories that are going to provide that pressure in the event that the president does ultimately put that 25% across the board tariff on us.
Next, we have a question from Wolf Deppner, Black Press.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question. Premier, if I understood things correctly, the reporting requirement to the legislature will happen only after you've taken any actions, correct? But I want to focus on the section of the bill that speaks of anticipated economic challenges to British Columbia. The definition of an anticipated economic challenge and who decides whether an economic challenge is anticipated? Thank you.
You know what, I'm going to pass this over to my lawyer, Wolf.
Yeah, thank you. Wait for this to get down. So when we designed the guardrails on the use of that power, we were looking at it in terms of anticipating when and what circumstances it would be used in really unpredictable circumstances. So if there is a potential impact to our economy through a tariff measure or something that disrupts jobs, whether it's the Columbia, also as broad as something like the Columbia River Treaty is written up, and we have to step in as cabinet in an emergency way to protect part of those economies or protect part of those businesses through any regulatory power that we may need. It gives us the ability to do that on an emergency basis. And also the bigger work of transforming our economy will happen at the same time. So it is in the event that there is an ability through our legal tools to protect something that is at stake in our economy through basically the actions of the foreign government of America. So it gives us that scope and ability to step in extraordinary times. We needed these extraordinary powers. We probably will need these extraordinary powers to respond in a way that helps protect British Columbians.
To Wolf for a follow-up.
Thank you. So if I heard you correctly, this bill gives you the power to take preemptive actions in anticipation of any future challenges. But I want to sort of ask you about what in the bill would prevent your government from potentially nationalizing, for lack of a better term, a provincial industry. Thank you.
Yeah. That's it.
Thanks, Wolf. So the bill does require that there has to be anticipated harm to the BC economy. That's a standard that would have to be defended in front of a judge on judicial review, that there was a reasonable expectation that there was going to be harm caused by a foreign government to the BC economy And the harm that this is intended to be focused on is the president and his executive orders. The second part of your question about nationalizing an industry or expropriation or any kind of authorities like that. This is about regulatory measures to be able to respond quickly to make sure that that we can both either put pressure on the United States or mitigate harm. So in the event that the president announced, we got the Premier of Ontario, he decides to cut off electricity to the United States to send a message, which he's threatened to do a number of times. And in response, the president says, fine, I'm going to cut off electricity to Canada, or I'm going to cut off other forms of energy supplies to Canada. It would allow us to direct companies to ensure that energy flowed to industry in British Columbia, to direct hydro to take certain steps or give them authority to take certain steps to ensure that the lights stay on in British Columbia and that industry continues to be able to power up, to draw down reservoirs, to respond in real time. These are obviously nightmare scenarios, but unfortunately this is a nightmare and it's going to last 4 years, and we're going to be prepared for whatever comes.
Katie DeRosa, CBC.
Premier, the measures regarding the Tesla chargers, are those only for Tesla, or will they apply to other American manufacturers? And can you explain the reasoning of why you're taking that measure?
Yeah, it's just for Tesla, and it's because of Elon Musk.
Katie, for a follow-up.
Apparently China is putting in huge tariffs on the fishery industry. That was brought up in question period today. Are there any measures to respond to those tariffs? And again, is that another example of trying to move away from markets because China is a major customer for BC seafood?
Yeah, it's incredibly unfortunate that that we're now in a trade war on two fronts, and I'm urging the federal government to treat the tariffs from China the same way as from the United States. They're having impacts. They will have impacts on British Columbians, on their livelihoods, and to make sure that they're protecting British Columbians. I was on a meeting with premiers. Concern was expressed from the premiers from Atlantic Canada, as well as from me and from the premier from the Yukon about impacts on fisheries and fish-related jobs. We're going to make sure that we're supporting the seafood industry in accessing other markets. I just met yesterday with the Consul General from Japan. I've been meeting with representatives of governments around the world that are very keen to expand their trade relationships with British Columbia right now, because they are also trying to get away from the United States. As we all pull away from the United States, it creates a huge opportunity for British Columbia, given our free trade agreements as Canadians with many of these jurisdictions, and we're going to exploit them to the maximum to protect British Columbians.
We're going to take questions from the phone lines now. Reminder to those on the phone to stay muted until you are called upon. First, we will go to Ashley Joanno from CP.
Yeah, just back to the questions about the broad powers that this legislation gives you in the cabinet. When you talk about how the regulations do have to come back to the legislature, I mean, they don't have to be approved by the legislature. So are you talking about the reporting that would happen in October? And if that's the case, is that really enough of oversight?
The bill itself needs to pass through the legislature, and then it needs to come back again. The regulations need to be tabled in the legislature. The government is governing with a very slim majority. At any time, members of the Legislative Assembly could decide that this was overreach, collapse the government, we'd be into an election, and I would stand and tell British Columbians that these authorities, this bill, is to exactly what I'm telling them today. It is to respond to nightmare scenarios that are eminently in the realm of the possible with this president, and that my guess would be that they support us being able to respond to natural disasters or to man-made disasters quickly and effectively, and to ensure we have the authorities to do so. If we can anticipate a disaster coming, we darn well better be prepared for it, and that's what we're doing with this legislation.
To Ashley from Canadian Press for a follow-up.
Yeah, I'm just hoping for a clearer response on what you see as sort of the trigger point to implement some of these things. What would have to happen for you to implement the powers such as the tolls, things like that? Like, what's your red line?
So we're working with premiers across Canada, and what I said to Doug Ford from Ontario was, he went out on his own on the electricity price, was just have your staff pick up the phone, give a call over to British Columbia, and we'll coordinate our responses together. So it's not just a target on one province, that we're all standing together as Canadians. And also, we'll be more effective if we do it together. So the next beat that we can see, and knowing that there may be many beats in this story that we between now and then, through executive orders or whatever the president wakes up and thinks about, is the 25% across the board tariff on all Canadian goods that the president has promised. That will require a strong response from Canadians. We'll work with the federal government and with the premiers and with the tools that this bill enables to ensure that British Columbia is part of that Team Canada response, and we're sticking it to the Americans, just like the president's trying to stick it to us.
Next, we have a question from Mike Hager, Globe and Mail.
Thank you. You mentioned welcoming Governor Ferguson north. Have you reached out to Governor Dunleavy yet? And if so, how did that interaction go?
Governor Dunleavy from Alaska?
Yes.
Yeah, we had a good conversation, and I would say, the governor is in a challenging position of knowing that two things are true: that British Columbians and Alaskans have strong relationships, that we work closely together, that we work together on fisheries, on mining, on building the Alaska Highway and maintaining it, and also that he is a Republican, and he is in the same party as the president, where the president and one of the richest men on earth, if not the richest man on earth, have threatened to primary and punish anybody who speaks out against the president's agenda. And so I would say that I did my best to present the importance of the ties between Alaska and British Columbia, the importance of the governor supporting those ties and speaking to the president about these things and advocating for them. He was receptive to hear that from me, but he didn't provide any assurance that he would be advocating for British Columbia, and I understand why. But we really need him to do that, and we need the Congresswoman to do that, and because they understand more than many Congresspeople and more than many governors the close ties between Canada and the United States.
To Mike for a follow-up.
Sorry, when was that meeting, and was he forewarned about the potential for these tolls? And then in terms of other non-tariff measures, are you considering tolling, say, rail exports that pass through Canada, or potentially marine? I don't know how those would work, but marine traffic coming from the States. And then how big a pool of other non-tariff measures does your government have in its backpack to unleash? Like, in terms of the potential impact, it seems like a very small amount of goods flow into Alaska from BC. So are there other non-tariff measures that you're withholding announcing, and how big could that impact be from those other measures?
Right now, members of the public service and certainly every member of our government are identifying and soliciting from community members, from business leaders, opportunities for us to step up and protect British Columbians by imposing non-tariff measures on Americans. This legislation gives us the ability to be able to act on those suggestions as they come forward in order to be able to respond if and when things escalate significantly within the trade war. We have jurisdictional limits under the Constitution about what we can and can't do. The trains, the marine shipping on tidal waters, These are areas for the federal government. I've encouraged them strongly to have a look at what they can do, what steps they can take to respond to the transshipment of American goods through British Columbia. I've also encouraged them to look at the stockpile of critical minerals like germanium produced at Teck Smelter, a product the Americans can't get anywhere else except from Chinese-controlled mining companies, and the Chinese government has already said that they've cut off supplies of germanium to the United States. This is a mineral used for night vision goggles, for military applications, and they can only get it from Trail, British Columbia. And so these are tools that should be available, all of which communicate the message of our entanglement and how tied we are to the United States, how we depend on each other, and hopefully we'll be able to deliver that message to the President.
We're going to go to our last question and follow-up from Thomas Seal, Bloomberg.
Hi, Premier. I wanted to ask about Tesla again. I was just looking at the Clean BC website, and I don't see Tesla cars there, but that might be due to existing parameters of the program. I just wanted to clarify, have they been removed, or were they never there?
Yeah, Tesla cars are too expensive to qualify for the Clean BC Auto program, but they also produce a product called a Powerwall, which is like a battery for your home, as well as chargers and accessories that qualified for Clean BC subsidies and programming up to $10,000 in subsidy. I think that if British Columbians heard that $10,000 of taxpayer money was going to Elon Musk, they'd want to throw up. So we removed them from the program.
Thanks. And just on the Columbia River Treaty, have you had any communication from the US side about why they paused negotiations? The Globe reported Trump had issues with the treaty, felt it was unfair.
That's the best information that we have has been reported in the media. It's disappointing to us, and we hope the Americans come back to the table. It's a mutually beneficial treaty. The governors that benefit from the treaty understand why the treaty is important and how it works to benefit both Canadians and Americans. And the proposed amendments to the treaties, actually, we're going to make it better for everybody. So if the President has suggestions about improving it that don't involve putting a giant drinking straw into British Columbia and sucking us dry, then we're glad to hear them.
Thanks, everyone. That's all the time we have for today.
Great. Thanks very much.